So, how you doing, Rick?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
Yeah.
So, the last time we spoke, I remember it was, I think, 2010 when we were filming the John Zaffis documentary,
Right.
Museum of the Paranormal. You played a priest, an exorcist priest.
That's right.
And it's not far from what you do in real life. I mean,
Right.
you are a priest of sorts, right?
Well, I'm actually studying for ministry through the National Spiritualist Church. I'm working right now on my credentials as a medium certified and as a commissioned healer through the church. And eventually I'll go on to ministry. Yeah.
Oh, great. So, and you were with that church.
I've been there 21 years, yeah.
21 years, so back, wow, so you've been doing this quite a while. Spiritualism, a lot of people don't completely understand what spiritualism is. Can you explain what's the belief?
Well, they do consider it a religion, but there's no worship or anything like that. There's no deity. There's reverence. There's respect for whatever the powers that be. Most people think that they concentrate on spirit communication, which is a big part of it. But usually, most spiritualist churches concentrate more on spiritual healing. That's the core of their system of beliefs.
Yeah. And I remember, in your interview in 14 Degrees, you were commenting on the Fox sisters, and they really started the whole movement, isn't that?
Yeah, they did back in upstate New York near Buffalo in Hyde Park. There were three of the Fox sisters, and they heard rapping sounds, and they were able to set up a communication based on those rappings. And some of the evidence that they got kind of corroborated later on as research was done into the property. So, and actually, just coincidentally, I was president of a thing called the Fox Center for Spiritual Awareness, which is now an online thing. But I was president of that for a while, and we used to travel around the area and do different workshops and demonstrations.
Interesting.
It was very interesting stuff. Yeah.
So you've been keeping busy in it.
Yeah, not too bad. As much as can be.
Right.
I do as much as I can.
Now, back also to 10 years ago, I mean, I can't believe it's been 10 years, you were a member of a paranormal group called Spirt Encounter Research Team, Spirt. Right. Are they still together?
They've kind of dissolved over the years as the cases were less and less, and the ability for some of the members to get to where we needed to be. Transportation was a little bit of an issue as the cases got farther and farther away. So, due to a lack of follow-up and a lack of continuity, it kind of just dissolved, and I stepped away. But I've been doing other things with other groups.
So you went on and you started to do things on your own?
I started a little bit of things on my own. What I would do is basically a mediumistic reading of a property. Right. And later on, some of the local groups, I was acting kind of like a consultant, and they would call me in just to see that aspect of what they were doing if they didn't already have a medium on their side.
Gotcha. How do you think things have changed since the 10 years ago? I mean, when you started, has anything changed on the medium side of things in 10 years, or is it pretty much the same?
I think it's pretty much, nothing new under the sun. It's just, people at different levels of understanding. As spiritualists, they say we don't believe, we understand. And there are a lot of people who just are working on that and will probably always be. I know I will always be learning. I'll always consider myself a student and never, ever an expert.
That's a good attitude to have, yeah. So you think that, has the approach to how, things can change over time, has the approach to how people communicate with the deceased different now than 10 years ago, or is it the same methodology?
It's the same methodology, but what people are trying different things. They're trying different ways of communication, both with the progressive equipment and stuff like that. They're experimenting with a lot of things. But I think what I call mental mediumship, which is what I do, what I've been trained to do, I think that's pretty much stayed the same. I mean, it's been the same since the late 1840s when the modern spiritualist movement started. There's physical and mediumship that's mental.
Right.
And I do the mental. I've trained to do the mental part.
In terms of ghost hunting specifically, either be it working with a team or even something doing on your own, how do you think ghost hunting itself has changed over the years? Do you think that it's progressed, or is it stagnated, or what's your thoughts?
I think it's a little stagnated right now. I'm sure it's progressed as far as the equipment that's used and so forth. But I just think that a lot of what we see in the media, although some of the evidence that they get is pretty compelling, it's overshadowed by a light of stupidity because of the rest of the things. You've got Curly, Larry, and Moe running around in the dark, scaring each other and calling it paranormal.
Hey, what's going on around here?
There's a hideous ghost walking around with its head in its hands.
Where?
There.
There's nothing over there. Where?
It went behind a chair. I saw it.
Now look, once and for all, we'll show you there's no ghost behind chairs. Hey, is there?
And it really casts a weird shadow on the rest of it and makes the rest of it a little bit.
I certainly agree.
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing too, because television shows, I remember back in the day when we were doing 14 Degrees, ghost hunters had just hit the air. One of the things I liked about it was that they didn't find everything every episode.
Right.
You know, that you could go 10 episodes and they didn't see anything.
Right.
And now every single episode,
Yeah.
they're getting, which is, as you know, as an investigator, you don't get physical evidence every case out. I mean, the medium approach, I'm sure, is a lot different than that. But
Yeah.
how is it different? Can you
Well, I mean, specifically with the way that I work, if they're doing a case, I would prefer not to know pretty much anything about it. I don't want to know the history of the property or who lived there, who died there, or who they think it might be coming through. The only information I like is what kind of things are going on. So if something's going to be thrown at me, I know to duck.
Sure.
And pretty much where the activity would be, you know, where in the building or in the house or so. Someone once chastised me on that and said, well, you're a medium, you should know where it's supposed to be. And I agreed, but I said, when you go to the doctor, you tell them where it hurts. So it just makes it easier.
Good analogy, yeah. So that's, as far as equipment goes, I mean, have you seen any improvements in equipment in your experience?
Well, some of the groups I work with have got just the old school, the EMF meter, the Frank's box sometimes comes through. There's a few other things that are going on, but I basically don't work with the equipment that much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I stick with the mediumship part. And most times the group will go in and do their thing, and then I'll go in afterward. I don't usually work with the group, and then we kind of compare.
Oh, okay, yeah. So in terms of like Frank's box, I know a lot of mediums that I've known over the years like to use that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's any credibility to Frank's box?
I think there can be. I have seen it used with what sounded like answers to the questions that couldn't be explained any other way. So I'm sure that it does work in certain conditions, but conditions have to be so perfect, actually, for anything to come through. As you know, most of your investigations, you don't get anything.
Right.
So all the conditions have to be just right in order for something to come through, and I think it's the same with the Frank's box.
Makes sense, yeah. So let's talk a bit about mediumship for a bit. Now, do you think mediums over the years have gotten a bad rap, and do you think there's, or do you think that people are more receptive now to using mediums than they were before?
Well, it depends on how they look at a medium. As far as an investigation is concerned, I see a medium as an instrument. If you were to get an anomalous reading with one of your instruments, you may call in a medium and say, look, there's something different here. Can you pick up on anything? And it would be the same the other way around. If I were, as a medium, found something that was anomalous, I may say, you know, it's cold over here, and they'll bring in a thermometer or a thermal camera or something and see if it corroborates with what I'm getting.
Right.
So a medium is just another instrument. A lot of people have a hard time seeing it that way. They see it as kind of silly.
Right. And
Not
you've
silly.
always, I know from knowing you all these years, I know you've always professed that you are unable to prove your experience to anybody.
Right.
You know, I remember the quote, I think it was from your interview, it was, I could tell you there's trees outside and I could take you out and show them, but I can't show you my experience.
Right.
And you've also been a proponent that everybody has this ability to do this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And have you seen people over the years all of a sudden have the ability to develop? I mean, I imagine within the spiritualist church that you see that kind of thing. Right?
Yeah, I've seen people who come in, you know, just kind of seeing what it's all about, and all of a sudden they open up very quickly. I've seen people, myself included, who are very stubborn and just stayed until things started happening, and it did take a while with me, even though I'm third generation in my family of mediums. I have my healthy skepticism with me at all times. So.
Yeah, I remember you being a very rational person when evidence was presented to you. When we investigated the Charlemagne Inn with Spirt at that time, I remember they were showing you pictures and photographs, and you were very uncertain that they were anything of any relevance at all.
Yeah. I'm pretty skeptical when it comes to, especially photographs. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine of orbs. For the most part, they're dust, they're bugs, they're moisture, they're lens refraction. I've seen a few that can't be explained, that I would consider at least possibly paranormal, one that was tucked behind a wall, which would be impossible. It would be round no matter where it was.
It wouldn't be
and
dust.
one side of it would not be behind something.
Right.
How do you explain that? I don't know.
Right. That's basically the good answer is I don't know. It's good to not know something, you know.
Right,
if you don't
absolutely.
Know it. Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit about this before, but in terms of ghost hunting, you think a bit has fallen off. What do you think is the reason for the fall off in the attraction to paranormal research of ghosts?
I think some of it is the lack of credibility in some of the TV shows that we see. Like I say, it just makes them look like a bunch of buffoons running around in the dark. And I think that has made it less of a science and more of a a hobby for nerds, basically.
Yeah.
Wannabes.
And so, do you think fraud has any play in any of this at all? I mean,
I think there's some fraud out there, but fraud in investigations is not as common as fraud in mediumship. So,
yeah, historically,
yes.
I think history's shown that as well.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think because, like you said, you can't actually show the person your experience, so it's easier to fool people when you
Absolutely,
have, when you
yeah,
have
yeah.
it under. It's kind of funny too, you know. I mean, when we had the turn of the 20th century, we had there was a big surge in supernatural and paranormal, and then it had a fallout because of a lot of fraud, and it kind of dropped off. There was a crash, as you mentioned before, mediums in the past interview, I mean. And now here we are again at the turn of the 21st century, and we're seeing another lapse or a decrease, or at least if that's from my opinion too. I think that there's been a drop off on it, and part of this trip that we're on here is to see if people are really feeling that lack, or if the people, the old timers that were in from 10 years ago, are still as revved up as they once were. It's going to be interesting to get that group consensus picture, you know.
Yeah, I think I don't really see it as a lapse. I see it as part of a pattern, and I think it has to do with the progression of instrumentation and so forth. Early in the 20th century, they were just starting out with photography and perfecting that, and that's basically where the first fraud came in, was fraudulent photographs. And then our technology kind of took off from there, and I think it may have, as far as investigation, it may have kind of reached a plateau for a little while, and this is a time to step back, invent a bunch of new stuff, and then go forward again. So it just seems to be kind of a waxing and waning kind of a thing.
Interesting perspective, too. Do you think that, there's a lot of claims out there with a lot of this new equipment, specifically with the Spirit boxes or other devices that people come out. Do you think there's any device out there now that is, that is the one-stop shopping for ghost hunting? I mean, yeah.
I don't. I think that every device may have some validity to it, but there's no Tesla's phone to talk to the dead or anything like that, right? There's nothing that's specifically comes to mind that's better than any other instrument.
And there are a lot of people that would claim that there are, with their equipment or the things that they do. And I've seen a lot of die-hard defendants of the equipment they use, that it's the golden thing. What do you think about devices like that have a lot of white noise for listening to audio? Do you think that they give you more EVPs than not, or do they make you think you have more EVPs?
I think that in some cases they just make you think there's more there. You're going to put together sounds and make words out of them, and someone else could get an entirely different sentence than you did by listening to the same sound. So it's difficult. But when you say that people lean on one particular instrument, maybe because they have more experience with it, they can hear it better. And I mean, there's a school of thought that says that someone's energy might make it work better. So if someone's worked with a particular instrument for a long time, their own intention of it working may have some effect on it.
Interesting, yeah. In regards to the flow of popularity in the spiritualist church, have you seen an increase over the last 10 years, or a decrease, or has it stayed steady in terms of how many people that are into it? Or
in the last 10 years, I think it stayed just about steady as far as how many people have stayed with it and how many people are coming into it. Our church moved physically, geographically to another location, and the attendance in the church is about the same as far as how many people per week. It's not the same people because it moved.
Oh, so you had turnover, but it stayed.
Yeah.
How many groups over the years have you worked with since CERT? Have you worked with many?
I've worked with probably half a dozen groups, some of them only once, and some of them several times. Yeah.
Do you see any changes in their techniques?
I have not. I've seen people who use the same methods and the same equipment, but more professionally. So it's kind of the same, but not the same. It depends on the people and not the instrumentation.
Right. A little more responsible these days?
Right, yeah, just a little bit more professional and taking things a little bit more seriously, and just doing things without clowning around or jumping to conclusions or something like that.
It used to be that they wanted to mimic what they saw on television. Do you see that still, or is it?
Absolutely. Even some of the phraseology that they use, it's like it's the same. There's one particular person on television, and I know there was a group of people who used to take a drink every time he said a certain phrase, and it would be 3 or 4 times in each episode. So
we knew a group that actually went on investigations, and they had a plunger because it was in homage to the plumbers that were on television. So
okay,
yeah, so they would bring a plunger with them as some kind of omen. But so maybe, do you think that the groups themselves were in fact the cause of their own demise? They created the surge, and they were also the cause of people getting tired of it from tedium.
Yeah, I think not only people who are observing it, but the people who are doing it. True investigation, like you had said before, 95% of the time you're sitting there doing nothing and waiting for something to happen, and it doesn't.
Right.
And I think people realize that what they see on TV is filtered down, and they put all the good stuff in there and leave out the other 80 or 90%. And that's just not the way it is in the real world.
It gets tiresome.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. Anybody who's ever been on an investigation can tell you it's a long, hard night.
It is.
If you do it for a long period of time. I mean, in fact, even over the years, my own group, we've cut down our investigations to just a few hours from what it used to be
overnight.
Overnight, really long hours early in the morning. And if you're doing it from a scientific point of view, it could be very fruitless for a long period of time.
Yes.
And you have to really have a reason for wanting to do it. Have you maintained, you still investigate ghosts, right?
I do occasionally, yes.
Yeah.
I'm very busy with the church credentials right now and working on some other things.
Have you had a lot of investigation cases? Have they stayed steady over the 10 years, or have they declined in the amount of cases you get for research?
Definitely declined. I mean, where I was getting phone calls every week or two, I'm lucky to get a couple a year now. It could be just geographically, it could be just in this area that's happening. I would say probably not, because this area is pretty active as far as paranormal stuff. It's old. Some parts are very old. There's a lot of Native American influence too.
Right. Have you seen a lot of groups in the area? I mean, have you noticed that there's more or less groups? Or
if you check something like Craigslist, there's always groups advertising on there, and I haven't actually seen any lately at all.
Yeah.
So I think there are fewer groups.
So this seems to be a real change in the position of paranormal research. Who do you think is left doing it?
Well, there are only a few groups in the area. I worked once with some people from Agawam who were very professional, and fortunately, as a medium, especially being a consultant, I don't have to stay there all night. I go in and do my thing and go home.
Yeah.
And then they see if it corroborates with what they've gotten throughout the night. So it's.
But who do you think? What kind of people? What kind of mindset do you think is left of the old timers that are still doing that? Because I know we have groups that come along. They go through a staff change. So even though a group may have been in place for 20 years, it probably has almost all new staff, I would imagine. This is just a guess, and this is part of what we're going to find out. But so you get a lot of turnover, and you get some newbies that come in. So that keeps the group name going and the push for it. But the people who have been around for the 10-year span that we're talking about, what kind of mindset do you think they have that they're still around and they haven't fallen out? Like, what's your mindset? Why are you still doing it?
Well, I'm still doing it because I know it's real. The people who are doing the scientific part, they just want to find that smoking gun, and they're very determined in some cases to do so. A lot of people give up very easily, and they don't. With mediumship, I knew pretty much in the first couple of years that I was involved with it that it was real. So it's something I could do for the rest of my life. And, it wouldn't be, there is no smoking gun. I've already found it. I found it right away.
Right. And that's the difference between belief and a science approach, is that belief is the end of the answer, and the science approach is
right. And my basic philosophy kind of flies in the face of most investigators, most mediums, and definitely clergy. Because my core is there aren't any demons. There's something that people created to scare other people. There are jerks here and there are jerks hereafter. And if they've been a jerk for a long time over there, they've just learned how to scare people. But they're people.
Right. Demons are a lot of folklore. I mean, it comes from the Greeks and such.
I've never run across anything that I would consider a demon. I've run across angry people, negative people, but you run across them just as much in the physical world as you do, And I've gone to investigations where people say, well, we locked that room because that's where the demon is.
Right.
I'm the guy who says, give me the keys and get out of the way. And I've never seen anything that I would consider a demon.
Speaking of evil people, let's talk a bit about drama in groups. It's one of the things that I think contributed to a lot of decline in a lot of groups, because people that I've talked to over the years have this, I've seen a lot of hard fallouts in groups where people just will not talk to each other ever again because of the... Have you seen that throughout the years?
I have. I've actually seen it in some of the local groups where I ran into some people, and I said, "Oh, are you still with that group?" "Oh, no, we're not with that group. We have our own group now." And it's been, there's some splits. There was a guy out on Cape Cod who made everyone who joined his group sign a paper that said that they wouldn't start their own group within 2 years or something. And my thought is, well, what's he going to do about it?
Right.
Basically, there's nothing legally he could do about it.
Right.
Because I guess he was having people join the group, learn what they needed to learn, and then go out and do their own thing.
What do you think has been the main subject of the drama in groups that you've seen? I mean, like you said, you have that where they're trying to create this system that all the team members don't want to have a part of. They don't want to be in control, be controlled that way. What do you see as far as drama in groups? What kind of scenarios pop up?
I think it's mostly based on ego. Somebody wants attention, and that may be, the clients sometimes call people in because they need attention. I've heard of cases where things were set up and they were obviously fake because the client just needs attention. But I think a lot of times the investigators are just looking for attention. We had a woman who every case she'd go into some kind of a weird trance. Well, maybe, but probably not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's very interesting. I'm pretty much out of questions. Anybody have anything they want to ask or?
Not all at once.
In the beginning I had one, but then I was focusing on every time.
I have one too, but I know we wanted to get a camera.
Yeah, just point. Let me see it. I'll grab it. Get it from this angle. Oops.
So,
Wait a minute. Yeah, this is recording now.
am I recording?
Yep.
Because they go off. I mean, the screen shuts down, but the light just flashes,
Right.
so I wasn't sure. Rick, you mentioned that you were third generation.
Mm-hmm.
So did you know right out of the gate that you had the ability, or did it transpire? Did you come to the realization like as a teenager, as a young child? When did you know?
Well, I don't have the stories of growing up seeing ghosts. When I was an adolescent is when my mother started doing readings, and you got to trust your mother and realize that she's not a liar or some kind of a fake. But I didn't actually get into it until I was over 30. There were some things going on in my life, and my mother just said, "You know what? Go down to the spiritualist church. Maybe they can help you out." And I took it from there.
So it was quite later on in life.
It was later on in life. A lot of people ask me, "Oh, you're gifted because of your mother," and I don't think it runs in families as far as like biologically or anything like that. But if your parents were both doctors, you're more likely to be a doctor because it's something that you're familiar with, that you grew up with. But on the other hand, you could also become a plumber or an electrician or something like that. And the other way around, if your parents were plumbers.
Have you experienced any type of... Did you hone your skills since you had the, I don't know, should we call it an awakening? What's a good term for it?
It is. There was a point after I had been in it for about 3 years and things were happening just a little bit here and there, just enough to pique my interest and get me. And then it kind of started to fade off. And when I decided that I was going to walk away from it, it was almost as if I was getting kicked from the other side, and it got to a point where it was stronger. It was actually stronger then than it's ever been in order to keep me in it because I needed to be there.
Yeah. Interesting.
So mediumship has existed well before the paranormal industry really broke out.
Yep.
Clearly, it's going to exist years from now, centuries. It's been around forever. Where do you think the future of paranormal investigation is going? I mean, your involvement in it will be there for as long as it's there, but you did mention earlier that you think this is a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it will get the popularity as it once did even 10 years ago?
Well, hopefully, and I'm confident that it will not only get the popularity, but it will be something that's more of a science than a hobby for people. Mediumship will probably be backed up better by other instrumentations. In other words, what I tell you, someone can corroborate either with other instruments or in other ways. I mean, if I go in and tell you a name that I pick up in a house and it's a relevant name, I mean, I'm not going to go in and say, "Do you know a John who's in spirit?" because most people probably do. But if I come up with, Shlomo or something like that, people are going to say, "Oh my gosh, that was the name of the guy who used to live here." As it's corroborated more and more through that kind of thing and through instrumentation and becomes more and more credible, I think it's going to be more of a part of something because it's more mainstream and more believable.
Do you think technology is going to play a bigger role as we go forward?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, technology is what's making it wax and wane. Like I said, we reach a plateau in technology, and there's nothing new. So you have to wait until somebody finally comes out with something new. And I've seen some of the groups who are doing that, at least trying things. Most of them are ridiculous. It's like watching Scooby-Doo or something, the way that they're trying to do these things. But eventually somebody might stumble on something. And when you have an exact science, that's what it is. It's trying things, no matter how silly they sound, until something works. Right. And then honing that particular thing to see if you can make it better.
So you think that perhaps through technology, that's going to filter out the individuals that are really serious about it from, like you had mentioned before, the Three Stooges approach, and that is what will make it tighter and better?
Well, I think it will certainly filter out the phonies.
Okay.
There are 3 types of mediums. Most of them, probably half of them, are just out and out liars. They're crooks. And then a good percentage of what's left are the people who are a little delusional and really think they're doing it even if they're not. And then that very small percentage are the people who are actually doing it. And I think with technology, we're going to be able to tell those things apart a little bit better.
So for you, having that technology backup mediumship and what you do is really integral, because if we're going to a more scientific approach, there will need to have better technology to support what you do in order to keep that through the paranormal stages or in that industry.
As far as paranormal, the paranormal industry is concerned, yes, but I believe it will always stay also a separate entity within the spiritualist community, as as a religion and stuff. We don't do, the church that I belong to anyway has very high standards, and they don't allow instrumentation, or they don't allow crystal balls or tarot cards. They're considered entertainment. We're not even allowed to use the term psychic fair when we have what most people call a psychic fair. We have to call it a medium's day. Otherwise it sounds hokey. So they have very, very high standards, and I think that's going to stay the way that it is. And it may, with the new instrumentation and the new technology, it may bring more people to the church because they know it's real.
So you'll continue to participate in paranormal investigations for as long as you feel it's valid. It's
Yeah, as long as someone needs me, I'm willing to put in my 2 cents. Basically, is what it is. Sometimes they do an entire investigation and things just don't quite add up, and they want to know if I'll go in there and see what I get.
Let me ask you something. What do you think about, because when we did 14 Degrees before, we had somebody that claimed to go into houses and was able to exorcise them and channel the gods through them and remove all of the spirits that were in the house. I mean, do you think that's something that's realistic?
No, I really don't. I think if someone goes in there and, like I say, they're people, and if you explain to them, you've moved on, maybe they haven't seen what they can do. They haven't been aware of their free will and that they can move forward, and they don't have to be there. On the other hand, with free will, they can stay there as long as they want, and no one with a bunch of burning grass is going to get them out of the house. It's just not going to work. I mean, that's just, again, you mentioned folklore. That's pretty much what that is.
Right.
It's more the intention behind it than the mechanical or physical part of.
So it's more of a placebo effect to the people doing it than anything
It
else.
is, and on the other hand, the intention of the people, like I had said before, may be what causes changes. It's been proven that thoughts are things, and they can affect our environment, like people being prayed for heal faster than other people, even if they don't know they're being prayed for, which proves that our thoughts can affect our physical environment.
So now, Rick, you're not a part of a ghost hunting group at this point in time.
I am not, no.
But independently, if would groups reach out to you?
Yes.
And how do they get a hold of you? Did this just word of mouth, or do you have a website? Or
I do not have a website. It is all word of mouth.
Right.
And there are some investigations that people only want the medium to come in, and I've done things on my own.
Gotcha.
But I'll work with any group. If I work with a group and I don't find them to be credible, I won't work with them again.
Gotcha.
But I've run across a few that are pretty good.
What are your thoughts on sometimes, there's a stigma sometimes around some mediums that could go in and cause damage to a family by, the fraudulent ones mostly, that they're going in and saying, giving the family a different history than they remember of a loved one who's passed away, and causing a bit of turmoil. What are your thoughts on the ethics of something like that?
Well, the ethics are kind of touchy. I have known someone who has been brought up on charges for a message that they gave during a mediumship session.
Wow.
Sometimes people, they just don't want to hear it.
Right.
An example is I had a lady who I was bringing through this gentleman in a military uniform. She knew who it was. I even came up with his first name, which was not a normal, average name, very popular. And I said that he had taken his life, that he had committed suicide. And she said, no, he was killed in action. That's why he has the uniform on. And I said, no, he wasn't. He committed suicide. She insisted. But then when she left, she went to visit her father and said, did Uncle so-and-so commit suicide? And her father he was in such shock. He said, how could you possibly know that? We hid that from everybody. So, yeah, people sometimes just don't want to hear the truth. And as a medium, we're trained to just give whatever we get. And I tell people, not all of it is going to be perfect. I don't usually get names. If I get a name, I'm going to give it to you. It may not fit anywhere. It may be my guides trying to test me.
It's an interpretation, right?
Yeah.
So your interpretation could be wrong.
Absolutely. And even if it's correct, if I'm bringing through someone from spirit, you don't want to ask them to make a decision for you because they're people. They can be wrong. I had a lady who wanted to know which, bachelor number 1 or bachelor number 2 she should marry, and she wanted to ask her grandmother. And I said, your grandmother could give you the wrong answer. She's not infallible. You don't get a book of how to be perfect when you get over there.
Yeah, my grandmother clearly gave me the wrong answer.
What?
Is that when she was alive, or?
What, were you cheating on a
Spouse,
test?
spouse.
Oh, I see. Oh, he's trying to make a joke. Yeah, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about technology and how the technology differs, but all the technology that is created and manufactured, and even the stuff that Mike has made, is to read atmospheric things.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think it's possible? Do you think the better direction would be to create technology that measures your psychology, your emotions? Because if what you do and you believe it wholeheartedly, then we should be measuring you. Because if we can't measure, if ghosts have nothing to do with atmospheric changes, then what's the point of measuring those things? Why not measure you? If the person is bringing you in, obviously they have a connection spiritually to something.
Right.
So why not measure you rather than measure? Like, do you think that's the better direction? Would you work with somebody like that? Do you think that, hey, maybe that's what people should be doing? Measure, the emotions. We already do it with
You become a biological sensor, I think.
Right,
is what he's
exactly.
saying.
So maybe it's better to. Would you say, if somebody said, hey, we'd like to do that, we'd like to put whatever telemetry unit on you?
Right.
Would you?
Absolutely. As long as it wasn't something that could possibly do any harm.
Yeah.
We've worked with things like thermal imaging, where when someone is receiving something, their body temperature may change. Now, that could be psychological.
Yeah.
They could be doing it themselves, either consciously or unconsciously, lowering their body temperature. But when someone has a body temperature change on one side of their body, you have to look at that a little differently. My problem with it is, whatever we need to measure, we may not even be aware of yet.
That's what I'm saying. It's like we're talking about in the future. Right now, we probably don't even understand what we'd have to measure.
Sort of an energy
Even
Well, more like an aura. I do auric things where every once in a while, if I really concentrate, I can see somebody's aura. And of course, you have Kirlian photography, which supposedly can see an aura. How accurate that is, I'm not really sure. And again, it's atmospheric energy. Even though it comes from our body, it's still a physical energy. And it may not be what we need to look at. We just may not know what it is we need to look at this point.
Yeah, I'm good with questions, eh?
Okay.
Rick, I want to thank you very
Thank you-
much.
thank
It's
you for
great
having
seeing you.
me. Yeah.
Yeah,
Look at
I'm
this
really glad
microphone.
you could be a part of this again.
Yeah. Next time you call it 28 degrees, because it'll.
Yeah, I know.
We should have it by 10.
What time is it now? Is it?
11:22.
Oh, wow. Way ahead of schedule.
You got someone else coming?
We're actually
someone
going
else
to
coming?
North Adams. Do you know Josh Mantello?
I know of him up at the Houghton Mansion.
He's no longer with the Houghton Mansion. He's now nature photography. So.
Well, I know they were on with Zach one time, and it was kind of amusing because they never mentioned that they were a paranormal team, and that was their head.